All right, it's 6:32. Let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Schaefer. I am a senior traffic engineer with Lochmueller Group. Thank you for coming tonight and welcome. The Kings Highway Safety Study was completed in 2020, and now we're at the point where the city and your aldermen are looking for your feedback. So tonight, we will start with a presentation and then we will answer your questions, which can be submitted in the Q&A box. This meeting is being recorded and it will be made available online following the meeting. Here with me tonight are representatives from the City of St. Louis and Lochmueller Group, from the Board of Public Service, Brennan Brown and Andrew Riganti, from the Planning and Urban Design Agency, Scott Blvd. This project goes through wards 12, 13, and 14, and those aldermen are also present tonight. Miss Beth Murphy, Miss Carol Howard, and Miss Vicki Grass. And finally, from Lochmueller Group, Chris Beard and Katie Shackelford. For your information, Lochmueller Group is a civil engineering consulting company that has been in St. Louis for 10 years. We have an office downtown on 10th, and many of us there have a specialized focus in traffic engineering and planning. Again, my name is Kelly, and I was the project manager on this study, and I'll be walking you through the presentation tonight. I have 11 years of experience, and I'm a licensed professional engineer and professional traffic operations engineer. One reason I like working on these projects is I also live in the city, so I can understand how important it is to you, how important your neighborhood is to you, and how important it is to feel safe and truly be safe there. So let's get into the project now. The Kings Highway Study was sponsored by the Aldermen and led by the Board of Public Service. It kicked off in 2018 and the report was finalized in 2020. It focused on the segment south of Chippewa, starting at Nottingham and all the way south to Gravois. Here, Kings Highway has 4 lanes with parking on each side and is mostly bordered with homes. There are concerns of speeding and general safety in the area, and I'd like to invite Ms. Murphy and Ms. Howard to speak to those. These 2 aldermen were involved in bringing the study forward and also throughout the process. And one quick note, Ms. Grass, representing the 14th Ward, she assumed her position after the study was completed. So she wasn't with us as we worked through it, but she will be the one responsible for if and how any recommendations in her ward are implemented. Ms. Murphy?
Yes, good evening. I said I'm Alderwoman Beth Murphy, the 13th Ward. And I said, like she stated earlier, this meeting is a culmination of concerns from my constituents that live along South King Highway. South Kings Highway or use those connecting roads. It traverses 3 wards, so I had consulted with my colleagues and we decided to commission this study and to see what we could do to increase the safety for the pedestrians and the motorists themselves. And now I want to hear what my constituents think about the plan, with most of my concern being for the people that actually live on South Kings Highway and those that traverse the way all the time, the connecting streets and that. So that's all. I'm glad to see so many people participating. Thank you. Carol.
Good evening. I would like to welcome all my constituents from the 14th Ward that are attending this evening and online to learn of this traffic study. It's been a long time in coming. We had a little bump in the road because we have a new alderman from the 12th Ward, so we were kind of waiting for them to come on board. I hope that you gain knowledge from this and are able to give input as to what your desires are in this. And many of you were surveyed. Did we survey? I think we surveyed. They went and studied. They put down speed strips. So I think this will be quite interesting. There is a big project planned for the big triangle there at Christie. I'm not sure whether I will be capable of shouldering that responsibility financially, but we're going to look at it and get some input. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Alderwoman Grass from the 12th Ward.
Thank you, Alderwoman Howard and Alderwoman Murphy. I just came into this study in 2020 when I was elected. Thank you to my 12th Ward constituents for being here tonight. I'm looking forward to your questions and seeing how you feel about this. There's some good things that could happen, and the only thing that'll keep us from doing it is money. So we have limited revenue in the 12th as well, and we'll see where it takes us. Thanks for being here.
All right, thank you, Ms. Grass. And sorry, I think I mixed up the ward numbers with how I
Okay.
identified you. So that is my mistake. So the
No
studies, so the study's goal was to identify and analyze traffic calming and safety strategies. The city is also making substantial efforts to increase multimodal and accessible facilities. Therefore, it's important that any of our solutions incorporated or at least considered these elements. The contents of the study are shown on the slide and are what we are going to present tonight. We'll have a review of existing conditions, and then we'll move into the recommendations that were designed based on concerns, data we collected, and our own observations. The recommendations include a new lane configuration on Kings Highway that accommodates vehicles as well as cyclists. We have also developed specific countermeasures for areas where there were additional safety concerns, including the intersection of Christie and Neosho, and the segment between Gresham and Bonita. And finally, we'll present how these improvements impact safety, traffic operations, speed, etc., and then costs. In order to analyze existing conditions and produce feasible concepts, the study collected lots of different data as seen on the next couple slides. Our data was collected in 2019, so this was before COVID. Then average daily traffic along Kings Highway was around 11,500 vehicles per day. In the morning, most traffic is traveling north towards 44 and 64, and the opposite is true in the afternoon. While most traffic travels to and from the south on Kings Highway, there's also a lot of traffic that comes from Christie. We collected and analyzed turning movement counts at the signals from Nottingham to Gravois. We found that all signals operate with acceptable to favorable levels of delay and queuing for both the morning and the afternoon peak periods. Moving to bike and pedestrian data, we counted very few bicycles. However, this is not unexpected. Currently, there are no bicycle facilities on the road, and with the cars traveling at higher speeds, this is not a welcoming environment for these users. Most intersections saw at least a few pedestrians. We counted almost 100 at Schollmeyer during the peak periods. This activity is associated with the Gateway Science Academy that's located at the intersection. Many people park on the west side of the street to drop off and pick up students here, and they use this signal to cross Kings Highway. As for speeds, the concerns that initiated study were validated with the data we collected. While the speed limit is 35 miles per hour, average speeds were 40 and 41 at the two spots that we collected data. And these are the speeds in between traffic signals. The highest speeds recorded along the corridor were between 50 and 65, and the very highest, those in the 60 to 65 range, those were recorded more to the south, not far from the curve at Gresham. And finally, with regards to on-street parking, we generally found low utilization throughout the day. The exception again being near the school where parents park on Kings Highway during arrival and dismissal. And we saw a lot actually between Schollmeyer and Gravois where it is marked no parking. Another piece of data collected was crash history from 2014 to 2018. There were nearly 400 crashes in that 5-year period. The charts on the slide break down the most common crash types and the severity of crashes. As you can see, the most common types were rear end, parking, and right angle, that being like a T-bone crash. These types are common on arterials with frequent signals, especially when speeding is prevalent. The heat map on the right is a plot of all the crashes, and you do see the greatest concentrations at the signals. As for severity, crashes in general are classified as being either property damage only, minor injury, disabling injury, or fatal. On Kings Highway, you can see that the majority of crashes were property damage only. Around a quarter of crashes were minor injury, and there was a total of 4 disabling and 3 fatal crashes. And of the 3 fatal, 2 of those occurred at Gravois. Looking again at the heat map, the highest crash locations included the signals at Nottingham and Neosho, at the north end of the project limits, and then Gravois at the south. This map helped us reveal an unexpected location there at Holly Hills. After seeing this, we went out and did more observations and discovered a few factors for this. Eastbound traffic at Holly Hills is heavier in the afternoon peak, and many are crossing all 4 lanes of Kings Highway. Not only is that a long distance to cross, we found poor visibility from the side streets. Higher speeds on that segment also make the road more dangerous with these conditions. And another segment with high crashes, you can see on the heat map, is between Gresham and Bonita. So this was an area the aldermen were particularly concerned with when we started the project, and the crash data validated those concerns. And finally, we did a review of the bus routes and bicycle network in the area. This segment is served by the number 95 Metrobus. That is a north-south route along Kings Highway, and there are 7 northbound and 7 southbound stops between Nottingham and Lochmueller. And now looking at the Bike St. Louis map to the right, the study segment shown in light blue is surrounded by a network of shared lanes and dedicated traffic lanes. At the south end of our project, Gravois has a mix of shared and dedicated lanes and provides connections to the Christie and River to Pear Greenways. Tower Grove Park and Forest Park can be accessed via a network of shared lanes on Eichelberger, Wary, and Mackland. And this wraps up our section on existing conditions. Again, all of this information was used to develop improvements for Kings Highway that would calm traffic and make it safer, and we will present those now. The study recommended a new lane configuration on Kings Highway that converts the 4 lanes of traffic into two through lanes and a center turning lane for vehicles, plus buffered bike lanes on each side. The buffer is that striped space you see in the picture between the bike lane and the vehicle lane. Parking would still be on both sides of the street. This lane configuration is proposed between Neosho and Lochmueller, which is shown on the map in blue. We are not proposing lane changes to the signals at Nottingham and Gravois, so the green segments are where we would transition from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, or vice versa. The biggest benefit to this lane configuration is the safety improvements it will bring. A lane reduction from 4 to 3 has been shown to reduce crashes by 29%. For this segment of Kings Highway, that equates to 115 crashes over 5 years, or 23 annually. Speeds are also expected to decrease by 5 miles per hour, bringing the average speeds right around the speed limit. And I mentioned Holly Hills earlier. Going back to that example, this concept would reduce crashes here by 1, decreasing the speeds, 2, reducing the total width and number of lanes being crossed by the vehicle, and 3, side street vehicles having a better view of traffic on Kings Highway, since they will be moved more towards the center of the roadway. Lane reductions from 4 to 3 are very common in the United States and have been studied extensively. That is how we're able to predict the safety and speed adjustments. And we also know that these conversions work best when daily traffic is 20,000 vehicles or less. From our counts, this portion of Kings Highway carries less than 12,000 vehicles per day. So this lane configuration is expected to operate well. The peak periods may feel a little more congested, but that's only expected during those short time frames, and Kings Highway will otherwise be better suited for traffic throughout the day. We looked at the traffic signals again with this configuration, and they would still operate at acceptable levels of delay and queuing. And speaking of signals, let's talk about some additional features included in our recommendations. The traffic signals along the 3-lane section will be upgraded with high visibility crosswalk markings. These markings are called continental or sometimes piano keys. Another benefit of the lane reduction is a shorter distance that pedestrians are exposed to vehicles when crossing the road. They would only cross in front of 3 lanes versus the 4. The conceptual rendering you see on the slide also includes new curb ramps that are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the study recommended upgrading all of the ramps along the route, not just at the signals. And for the bike lanes, they would not only be buffered, but protected at the intersections. Looking at the rendering again, a cyclist traveling north will be shifted next to the curb as they approach the signal, and a concrete median will separate them from adjacent vehicles. On the other side of the intersection, the median will go away and the bike lane will shift away from the curb where parking starts again. And these medians would be designed so that they only use a space before and after a signal where you're not allowed to park because of the proximity to the signal. So the number of parking spaces will stay the same. So these medians will not only protect cyclists, but they will also provide better sight lines at the intersections. So traffic on Kings Highway and on the side streets will have better visibility of each other. Separating out the cyclists will also increase awareness and visibility of these users too. The recommendations also include a raised concrete median on the west side of Kings Highway, and this is just between Gresham and Bonita. Vertical and horizontal deflections are very effective tools in calming traffic. A vertical deflection would be something like a speed bump. This concrete median would be a horizontal deflection and directly aimed to reduce speeds, which are causing this stretch of roadway to be unsafe for other drivers and the people that live here. As you can see in the picture, several homes have shamel pots in their tree lawn, and that's to serve as a barrier between errant vehicles and their homes. The median would instead become that barrier that people don't want to hit. So for the homes with shamel pots, that increases the distance from the barrier to their house, making their yards and their homes safer. Looking at the concept design on the slide, note that this lane configuration does remove parking on the west side of the street. That's not usually a popular thing to tell a crowd, but we did this for the greater safety benefit. And from our observations, parking wasn't highly utilized there anyway, assumingly because it is so dangerous. And one more note about the median itself, it will have reflective and raised elements to warn drivers of its presence in the roadway. Okay, so these improvements, the new lane configuration, the modifications to traffic signals, the ADA curb ramps, and the concrete median that we're looking at right now, these constitute the baseline recommendations. The study identified 2 more options that are meant to further enhance safety on the corridor. When we go over costs at the end of the presentation, we will present a cost for everything that you have seen up until now, and then costs for these next 2 options individually. This also means that the project, if it gets implemented, can be done so with all recommendations or selected parts. The first of the 2 additional safety options is shown here at Goethe Avenue. The picture to the left is an aerial that shows you just how wide that west leg is. It's about 130 feet for just one direction of travel. And for those traveling southbound and turning onto Goethe, this configuration also allows for really a high-speed sweeping right turn. From a safety standpoint, excessive pavement like this is not wanted because there are more places where vehicles can cross paths and come in conflict with each other. It also means there's not just one spot for a driver to look to see if there's another vehicle in their path. They're spending more time making sure that their travel way is safe. In traffic and planning, we would say that the movements at this intersection are uncontrolled. And then consider the vulnerable pedestrian. While motorists are spending extra time scanning the intersection for other vehicles, they may not notice someone walking nearby or in it. And for the pedestrian, similar to other vehicles maneuvering the intersection, they have to be much more aware of all the places a vehicle can come from too. So uncontrolled movements not only affect motorists, but it's also very dangerous for pedestrians. The concept shown on the right would narrow the west leg to create a more controlled and safer environment for all users. All movements onto Goethe would be made at a smaller, but actually a right-sized intersection. This configuration would also make the southbound traffic slow down to turn right onto Goethe. And for pedestrians, they would have a marked crosswalk and also a much shorter crosswalk. And the second option, this is a concept to modify the intersections of Christie Boulevard and Neosho Street. The existing configuration is excessively large, and its operation, how traffic goes to and from Kings Highway, Neosho, and Christie, is irregular and causes confusion. Like Goethe, these intersections have excessive pavement, there are uncontrolled movements, and many places for crashes to occur, and it is certainly not safe for pedestrians. And the crash data validates these concerns. The segment we're looking at right now actually made up 30% of the crashes in the last 5 years, those crashes that we looked at. So because of this crash history, more time was spent coming up with ideas to make this intersection or these grouping of intersections safer and easier to navigate. It also meant more drastic improvements could be necessary to make a difference. The concept recommended in the study is shown on the slide, and let's kind of break this down together. So Nottingham is at the top. It still has a traffic signal. A new traffic signal is shown at Neosho. This signal has high visibility crosswalks and protection for cyclists, including concrete medians at the intersection and along Kings Highway from Neosho to Nottingham. The big change you've probably noticed is that Christie gets realigned to the signal at Neosho. So the northbound movement that was used to going straight up to Nottingham will have to go to the signal and make a right turn. The previously uncontrolled movement from southbound Kings Highway onto Christie will now come to the new signal and make the left turn there. And if you can see my pointer, that's what I'm kind of showing you right now. And now they will come all the way down and make a left at the signal. Both movements that I just described carry a fair amount of traffic. The northbound movement is busier in the morning and that southbound left in the afternoon. There will be some delay now for these movements that were never truly controlled before, but they were analyzed and they are expected to have acceptable operations during the peak hours, and then they would operate well during all other hours. Right now, this is all still in a conceptual design phase, and this intersection in particular would go through thorough vetting before it's made final, and then it would still need approval by the streets department. And now all of the concepts have been presented. We will move on to costs. The baseline recommendation, which included the new lane configuration, intersection improvements at Eichelberger, Rhodes, and Schulmeyer, new ADA curb ramps along the entire project, and the modification between Gresham and Bonita, this comes to a total of 1.3 million. This cost also includes repaving the streets so you don't see remnants of the old roadway configuration, as well as signing and striping for the bike lanes and parking. The two additional options we discussed were at Gothi and then Christie and Neosho. The cost to reduce the size of the intersection at Gothi would be 34,000, and the improvements shown for Christie and Neosho would be close to 330,000. The cost to implement everything would be about 1.7 million. It was important to the Alderwoman that the study's recommendations be split up into a few options like you're seeing now. It is also important to them that you know that this work can be implemented in segments and adopted as funding is available. A recap of the benefits for the proposed improvements are shown on the slide. This project really would have an impact on safety. Like I said, there's a lot of data out there about the 4 to 3 lane reductions, and that change alone would be expected to decrease crashes by almost 1/3 along this roadway, along this segment. And then additional improvements were designed for high crash areas to make further substantial reductions. The lane conversion is expected to slow traffic down by about 5 miles per hour, which would get average speeds closer to the speed limit. The improvements would provide a more comfortable environment for cyclists and pedestrians, and all crosswalks would be made accessible. And it is important that the city's infrastructure be safer and accommodating for all users, all ages, and all abilities. The only change in parking is along the segment from Gresham to Bonita, where the concrete median takes the place of parking on the west side of the street, and bus routes are unaffected by this plan. Potential drawbacks include increased congestion, or at least the perception of it. In particular, the lane reduction does not provide for passing around slower moving vehicles. And for those traveling to and from Christie, they will now have to use a traffic signal. The right turn in the morning could see longer queues, but again, it's all expected to operate well even during the peak hours. Also, due to the lane reduction, there's the potential for some traffic to divert away from the reconfigured corridor. The north-south routes on either side of Kings Highway, where this could potentially go to, those would be Macklin and Morganford, and estimates for diversions are between 2 and 15% of traffic. And that concludes our presentation of the Kings Highway Safety Study. I hope that you found this informative. As mentioned, everything we just shared is at the conceptual level, and now your alderwoman would like to hear from you. If you haven't already, you can put your questions in the Q&A box, and those can be answered by the alderman, city staff, or Lochmueller Group. So we will go to those now.
Thanks, Kelly. The first question we have comes from Michael Hayes. Excuse me. Can you explain a little more how the raised concrete barrier will be positioned between Gresham and Bonita? Well, let's start with that first part of that question. Can you explain how it will be positioned between Gresham and Bonita?
So Kelly or Chris, can you talk about what you had proposed? I think it's a 4-inch curb, where the placement is.
This has, so the median itself is, can you see my mouse? Did I share everything?
Yes. we can
Okay.
hear.
So the median itself is 7 feet wide. It does still have, it's 7 feet off of the curb. This space will now be for the bicycles. So the parking does go away between these two intersections. And I believe it's a 6-inch curb.
And how high will this barrier be? How tall will it be?
6 inches.
6 inches. And then the final part of that question, will anything be done with the shamel pots?
Alderwoman, that I don't have an answer for.
Yeah, Vicky Grass, I think the option is they can stay or they can go. I think that's what we talked about in a previous meeting. I think it would be up to the homeowners. I'm not certain of that. Street department might have something to say about it, but Scott, can you answer?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, the idea here is that new median in the roadway hopefully can replace those shamel pots. We thought it was preferable for homeowners to move that protection out into the roadway versus having the shamel pots close to the front yards or in the tree lawns there, close to the sidewalk. The benefit of the median, so there's a couple benefits here. One, we've already got 1 lane of southbound traffic here, which is already expected to moderate the average speed. And second, the leading edge of that median as a vehicle approaches it will be painted and it'll be signed. So there'll be a lot of visual cues to a driver that they need to slow down going through that curve. And it moves the vehicle, instead of right now where the vehicle can be pretty close to that curb, it moves them about 14 feet away from the curb into the roadway. So all of those features, we think, combine to provide hopefully better protection for those homes and a safer experience for drivers who right now are sometimes leaving the roadway in a dangerous situation. I think the additional benefit is the curb space, then there's a protected space for cyclists, but I think we view this primarily as protection for those homes and a safer driver configuration.
Thanks, guys. The next question is, how much cost savings could we gain if we gave up the bike lanes?
So we actually looked, Scott, did you want to?
Oh, go ahead. You start, Kelly, and maybe I'll just chime in at the end. Thanks.
Okay. So we actually looked at another cross-section or lane configuration without bike lanes, but the biggest thing with the bike lanes and what we're showing here is we're still working within the curb. So there is space to allocate for some kind of road user. If we take out the bike lanes, then that extra width would go to, we'd have to redesign the lane configuration, and maybe that would make the lanes wider for the vehicles. And in doing that, the more narrow lanes, those are also meant to slow people down as well. We're even showing right now, this southbound lane is 11 feet, while this is 10 feet. So if we then split out another and gave out 7 and another, with the buffer, like 10, back out to the vehicles, it might not reduce speeds as effectively. Or it'll just change the lane configuration entirely.
Yeah, so let's talk through that a little more.
Okay.
So when we go from the existing 4-lane configuration to 3 lanes, we have more space to work with then. And if we don't have the bike lanes, the vehicular lanes become too wide, and you'll either get excessive speeding or you'll get driver behavior where drivers try to use that center turn lane as a passing lane if it's too wide. And we want to avoid that. Now, the bike lane provides a new facility for cyclists, but it also does some things for drivers as well. So the 2 big things it does, it leads to fewer accidents with parked cars because we've moved the moving vehicle 8 feet away from the parked car compared to now where the vehicle in the adjacent lane is very close to parked cars. And the second thing it does for people who are parking on the street is it creates that space for them to get out of the car that is farther away from a moving vehicle. So for a homeowner or a visitor who lives in this corridor, having the bike lane there, we think will lead to fewer circumstances where their parked car is damaged by another driver, and a little bit more comfortable experience just getting in and out of the car because they'll be farther away from moving vehicles. And the cost, I think there was a question about the cost. The cost drivers of this project are not really the striping. It's primarily the repaving and the intersection modification on the north end. So the additional striping there's certainly some cost to it, but it's a pretty small percentage of the overall cost of the project.
Thank you. We'll jump to our next question. This question comes from Lawrence. First, he says, thank you for doing thorough work and presentation. So congratulations, Kelly. He had a question about the cost breakdown. Do they include repaving and striping? Is there a cost specifically for paving and a cost specifically for striping?
Our entire estimate is broken down. We have an engineering estimate that has it down to the signs. Yes. I don't have that right in front of me. If that's something that we need to follow up with, we can do that.
His follow-up question was, if limited funding is available, can those 2 elements be completed without the other improvements?
I would think that the signals could be, they wouldn't necessarily need the concrete medians. They could be striped. And then the only other piece of, like, say, the baseline recommendations, we had the lane configuration. We'd want these 2 portions. Specifically paving and striping, I would think those would go hand in hand, though, if that's the biggest question there.
And then I believe this portion of the question is really for the city or the alders, but when is this street next due for paving?
So
I don't know. I don't know
I
if
don't know.
Scott can answer that. The problem with Kings Highway, there's so many, I guess, utilities that run under there. We constantly have, some disruption with the gas company and water. And then, that's all along Kings Highway is undermined with clay mines. So it was paved, I want to say 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. But I'm not real sure. And I don't know if Scott can speak to that. He may have a little more insight into that. But it hasn't, it's been probably in the last 10 years, it's been paved. And then, we had all the disruption with some utility through Spire and then some water and sewer things. So I really don't know, but it's a washboard right now.
Yeah.
So, I can't answer that. I don't know. Scott?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the most recent year it was paved. I would say overall, the paving condition today is adequate. It's not terrible, but it's clearly not new. And the repaving will be necessary, I would say, in the not too distant future. But the repaving is also an opportunity for the lane changes that give us a safer configuration. So I commend the Alderwoman for doing this traffic study in advance of a repaving. So we make sure when we do repave it, we implement hopefully a safe configuration that we've developed some consensus around.
Yes, I agree.
We have 3 questions in the chat box related to Holly Hills and Kings Highway. Are there any plans to address the concerns at this location?
Well, I said, that's in my ward. I said, they presented some in the study. As far as, I don't know what they're referring to. I know there was questions one time about a traffic signal being put there, and that was not under consideration by the street department, because there's one right at Rhodes and there's one at Gravois. And that's one of the reasons I wanted this study, was to take that particular intersection into consideration. And I think with the slowing of the speed and the bike lane, we'll have better visibility and it will improve. The safety will improve of that intersection. I don't know, does that answer their question? I don't know.
I believe so, and we can always, the chat box is still open for Q&A. The next question comes from Bill Stevens. How modular are the level of implementations? As in, are there any facets of this project dependent on other elements? Or you put in crosswalks at Christie and the barrier further down, independent of the other parts of the plan?
Well, I think there's some things that we can do that are independent of anything else. And we'll be looking at all of that. And if any of my constituents want to call me or text me or email me to talk about any one of these things in particular, I am happy to talk. I think there's some things that we can do independent. So I think the conversation should be had.
These are all at a conceptual level. If they need to be designed to be broken out, they can. That would just be the next step.
I think the important part of having this plan is the idea that we have the plan, we can isolate things, not isolate, but we can do part and still have that plan that we can come back to and connect to parts that have been done or parts that haven't been finished. So I think that's important that we all agree and everybody can get on board. And if you put bike lanes in one section, we can also put that and move it down the road and get it all working together at some point.
I agree.
Kelly, do you want to mention again that maybe the relationship between paving and striping, the benefits of doing a cohesive plan at one time? So if it's repaved, you would want to have a striping plan that would be put down one time as opposed to having to stripe a second time. So length configuration may want to be chosen before any paving is done.
Hey, Andrew, why don't I take that one? Sorry. This is Brennan with BPS. So basically, as we go through this and we're talking about what can be broken out and what can't, if we want to do this lane reduction and go to the new lane configuration, that really needs to be done all at the same time in all 3 wards for the entire length. Otherwise, you could potentially get like a bike lane that's there for 3 blocks and then it disappears again. And that could potentially cause more confusion than not. So we need to be able to do the repaving and the restriping because those go together. And we need to be able to do that in one fell swoop. But we could come in behind and do the other things like the intersection improvements. You can stripe before we get to the intersection improvements and we could come back later and put those in as it goes, or the signal improvements besides, moving the heads to make sure that they line up properly. So that's kind of what we could do later if we wanted to section out like that.
Thank you. The next question comes from Nick. He's asking, actually, this is a great slide to have up. concept, he asked that there are concepts where the bike lane is positioned between the sidewalk and the parking lane, creating a protected bike lane using the parking. Is that better than what is proposed, or is it better to have the buffer as you've shown?
Scott, do you want to speak to that since
Sure.
it's your expertise?
Yeah, so what Nick is referencing there is usually called a parking protected bike lane, where the layout of the road changes so that the bike lane is next to the curb, and then the parking lane is moved between the bike lane and the driving lane. And that is a viable layout for some corridors. There are a couple complicating factors, which I'll point out for this corridor. One is that configuration takes slightly more space overall for the parking protected bike lane and the parking lane. And we're kind of right on the limit of whether that may or may not work with the width we have curb to curb here. A second significant concern is that when you have a parking protected bike lane, generally you need a physical barrier to make sure the cars are not parking in the bike lane on the curb. And for the distance involved here, that would really add substantially to the cost of this project. You'd have to either do a median curb in the road that keeps the cars away from the curb, or there's some other modular products that you can bolt into the asphalt. But in either case, it would really be a substantial cost, and I think it might, it would certainly make it harder to implement given the funding available. And so those are the two key factors we'd look at. I think a third might be expected utilization of those lanes. The city is pursuing those designs in some places, but so far we have been primarily focused on areas where we know we have higher bike ridership than we do in this Kingshighway corridor.
Great, we've got a lot of questions, about 15 minutes to go, so we'll try our best to get through them. Michael's next question was, do you think the lane reduction will slow down traffic during off-peak hours? He experiences most accidents in the middle of the night.
Certainly the additional traffic that is present during the peak hours is a factor that slows people down. I think one way that it would slow down in the middle of the night, like you're saying, is if the concrete medians are built at the signals. So then that reinforces that cross section at the signals. So there is that potential there.
All right, the next question comes from the Firecracker Press. He asks, what about the block north of Gresham? As cars lose control around the curb, they often end up wrecking into property north of the curb between Gresham and Lizette.
This wasn't specifically addressed in our design, but it could be if that is a concern that when we go into final, that could be considered then. And that's exactly what this public meeting is for, is to get the input so that we can understand your exact current concerns and individual concerns and how they can be worked into anything that goes into implementation.
Thank you, Kelly. Lawrence, I'm hoping I get your question right. So he asked on slide 14, if we can go to slide 14.
Have we addressed this?
I think we
Brennan?
it was about the, we can do paving and striping and nothing else. So I do believe we've answered this question for you, Lawrence. The next question is, how much money does each ward involved currently have in their improvement fund? So that would be for the alders.
I'll go. I said, currently, I think in my ward capital, I might have, I don't know, about, I'd say maybe 200,000 right now, but that can't all be used for this. Out of the ward capital, we have to do, we have to take care of the entire ward, you know, from dumpsters to streetlights to paving to alleys. I don't know, offhand, also trees, sidewalks. I mean, that's what I would say. And I have some outstanding projects that aren't finished yet. And so that will come out of that also. I don't know how much will be allocated this year, this coming budget with the COVID and all that going on, the revenue shrinking. But I believe that's what I have about now. But I have outstanding projects in that also. So I hope that answers your question for me.
Mine's about the same. There's probably a little more than 200,000 in there, and I have some existing commitments that have been made with that, and then there's all those other things to do, streets, not streets, but trash, trees, you name it. It's all going to come out of that account. So we're probably in just about the same spot.
I have probably about little over 200,000 unencumbered, but you know, the city right now, our budget last year going in to the budget process, which we're starting now, was looking pretty rosy. Then COVID hit. And so, you know, right now we're looking at a deficit budget. So I don't know if that will affect our ward capital funds, which are allocated out of the city budget each year or not. But this would require all of us, you know, putting some money aside for this and saving up, especially the Christie Boulevard Neosho Street modifications. And I'm hoping maybe there might be, if BPS, and I don't know, maybe Brennan can speak to this. Right now, we're not getting many federal funds for infrastructure improvements, but I'm not sure if that'll change. If that would change and we have a windfall, I'm hoping maybe BPS would put this on their radar screen, that Christie Boulevard Kings Highway configuration, to possibly act on that. But that's something that, you know, that's working on unknown factions. So right now it doesn't look good, but, you know, you just never know what's going to happen in a new administration with the COVID. But, you know, it does look like we're in for kind of a downturn in the economy. So thank you. That's all I have.
Great. The next two questions are actually both related to the 95 bus route. There is concern about could there be accommodations for buses to pull over so that they don't hold up traffic? And the second comment comes that, you know, cars being impatient waiting for the bus to load and unload might be driving into the turn lane.
If we wanted to make accommodations for the buses, that would have to be then next to the curb, and that would take out parking and probably 3 or 4 spaces each time. So that would come at that cost. And I guess that's just weighing how important is it, or how often is that interruption versus keeping the parking.
I think we'd probably also need to get Metro to weigh in, because sometimes they don't like the buses to have to pull out of the travel lane, because then they have a hard time negotiating to get back in if they're doing that every single stop. So I think it's certainly a valid point, but something we probably want to also get their input in. But yeah, Kelly mentioned the on-street parking removal, and then there's also some issues potentially with the bike lane and how that interacts with the bus stop. There's been some other projects we're looking at where the bus, in order to, unless you want to interrupt the bike lane, the bus then has to, there needs to be something there so people can get out of the bus and be at the right height relative to the ADA requirements of the bus, and then also deal with the bike lane in that same area. So that's another potential complication I think we'd have to explore a little bit further.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. The next question comes, it says, the problems at Kings Highway and Goth, is the traffic from the restaurants, cars going the wrong way, and also they took away the sidewalk for side parking of their building. So I think this is more of a comment. So we will record your comment. And there's also another comment here related to continuing to look at Holly Hills and Kings Highway. It's extremely dangerous, and that site needs to be addressed. So we will include your comment. Lawrence says we answered his question, which is wonderful. Northbound crashes between Gresham and Lizette are also a main concern. So we are recording your responses. Why, there's another question, why not speed reductions and speed bumps on this site?
I'll take that one. So because Kings Highway is a major thoroughfare, we can't do any vertical disruptions. This causes problems for snowplows. So since this road is indeed plowed during snows like the one we just had, we can't put a vertical bump in there. It would cause problems. So we're only looking at horizontal deflections instead of vertical deflections.
Thank you. We also have a question in here. The stretch between Gresham and Rhodes has seen significant increase in high-speed crashes since COVID. We've had several streetlights taken out on both sides of the street multiple times. It seems like every time it rains, this happens. Could there be additional rumble strips to help slow traffic, or will the lane reduction solve this problem? So the question was rumble strips. Are they considered, would they be a solution here?
So I'll just mention the first part of the question is about pandemic-related accidents and driving. And there's really been a national recognition that that's become a problem all over the country this year. The reductions in traffic volume have led to a lot of reckless and dangerous driving. And I think we all hope that that is reduced as the pandemic ends at some point. But I might refer the question of rumble strips to Brennan with BPS. The city itself has not typically implemented that design or that feature. But any comments, Brennan?
Yeah, so this is very similar to the speed humps. It wouldn't have the same problem with the plows, but just when the plows go over any type of bump or vertical deflection, they just tear it up. So it's more of a maintenance issue. We'd have a hard time maintaining them, and so we don't want to put them out. We have a hard enough time maintaining the streets as it is.
And then Michael's final question, possibly Michael's final question. He's asking, what is the current shortfall for this project and when might funding become available?
So Alderwoman, do you want to speak to, this is just getting input and how you've approached your budgets thus far?
Well, when a plan is finally decided, I say I'm more than happy to transfer the funds. I guess it would depend what we do. If we start with the paving and the striping first, which seems to be the main thing, and I'm sure my colleagues would be more than willing to transfer the funds immediately. Some of the bigger projects we may have to save up for. That's, but I said, I think I could certainly put in my portion. We were going to divide it up. I think it's almost thirds, but not quite, as far as the expense. And so then I think I could certainly put in, a portion. Depends what we ultimately decide on doing,
It's the same for the 12th also. Once we decide on what we're going to do, I'm sure the three of us are going to find a way to share all the costs. It's just not going to be a lot.
Well, ladies, I think that's more than generous considering I have $329,000 to fund here down on Christ in Neosho. I appreciate that.
Well, we're counting on you not doing that right away, remember?
Yes.
I'm more than willing to do that. We need to really bite into this hard and see if there's any other funding out there, because I really do, in my heart of hearts, if you're familiar with that intersection, it's, sort of like you could go through it blindfolded, but I see people struggling all the time that may not be familiar with that area, trying to figure out how to manage around that. And there are a significant number of crashes through there, you know, in the morning time, particularly because people are racing through there. And also at this time, I'm committed to making some improvements on the east side of the ward, because I just finished a traffic study and have allocated funds to remedy some of the problems over there. So it'll actually be contingent on what our allocation is for the 2021 year, and how we move forward, I guess 21, 22, and how we move forward from there. So, but I'm willing to, you know, the money is the taxpayers' money, and we need to spend it. So thank you.
Thank you all. We have 2 questions I want to get to before we close this evening. The first question is part of Kings Highway the responsibility of MoDOT?
I am not remembering my maps at the moment, but this portion of Kings Highway is not MoDOT's responsibility. Scott, is that what you're remembering?
All of Kings Highway is a city route. MoDOT doesn't handle any of it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no MoDOT on Kings Highway.
Yeah, so there's no MoDOT. That doesn't mean we couldn't necessarily get federal funds because it's significant city street. That being said, our federal funds are pretty much tied up with bridges for the next 10 years, barring something I don't know about. So we will of course look into it, but it is very unlikely that that's coming soon. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. And the final question actually comes from Bev. She was a little late to the party, was asking a couple questions about some of the things we talked about this evening about Kings Highway and Gravois. And I just wanted to know where can people go to find out more information or to see this study or the information in this plan?
I believe it's on the city website, the entire, study.
Yes, if you look at the screen now too, we've got our final slide. And so any other technical questions after this meeting, they can go to Andrew. His information is right there. And the full study that was completed in 2020 is available at that website. And then Brennan, do you know when this recording will be available? Or how that works?
Soon. On the city.
It's usually a 24-hour turnaround, I can tell you. So.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.